So you want to try Tales of Graces F Remastered, but you're not sure if it's for you. Let's take a look over this title, spoiler free of course, to find out if it's worth your time. Well, first off, the Tales of games are very similar to the Final Fantasy series in where you don't have to play any previous entries to understand them. Unless stated otherwise, you can jump into any of these games at any point without having to play the previous ones. Tales of Graces F Remastered is no different, you can start here without playing the other games in the series. Graces F Remastered is the second game in what's stated as the Tales of Remastered project. This all started back in 2023 with the re-release of Tales of Symphonia. Unfortunately, back then there was a few issues with the remaster, but Bandai Namco have gone back and patched the game since. It seems that they've learnt their lesson on the backlash from this, since I can safely say that Tales of Graces F Remastered runs incredibly smooth on the PlayStation 5. The added up-res to the resolution on top of these already incredibly vibrant textures really makes everything pop and look incredibly nice. Funnily enough, Tales of Graces F Remastered is the second time this title has been remastered. This game was originally a Japanese exclusive released on the Nintendo Wii under the title Tales of Graces, but when it came time to release the game over in the West, they decided to add the F to the title to show that it's an enhanced port of the original game. Similar to something like Persona 5 Royal or Dragon Quest XI Definitive Edition. When it came time to originally remaster the game, they decided to add an entire epilogue to the title alongside some quality of life tweaks. This new remaster I can safely say is the Definitive Edition, adding all the quality of life tweaks from previous entries on top of even more. The DLC that was also made for the PlayStation 3 version is now all included on the disc with no additional downloads. If you was concerned at all that this game was going to be too difficult or maybe even archaic, don't worry, you can tweak the experience to your needs. As soon as you make a new file, you're immediately given these toggles to turn on and off to make the game easier or more difficult. Some of these really are overkill, but you have a variety of options here, such as the ability to turn off encounters, double XP, or make enemies drop more loot from battles. There's also the aforementioned DLC from previous releases that will give you even more resources. This game was really built with newcomers in mind for the genre. Let's get into the actual game itself and start with a brief look at the story. One unique aspect to Tales of Graces' story is how you start off before a 7-year time skip. This really adds for an interesting dynamic since you really get the idea that these characters grow up with one another and see it over the course of the journey. Every cutscene in this game is fully voice acted, which really impressed me. There's also these incredibly beautiful anime cutscenes that haven't aged a day. Some of the character models can look a little static at times, but that makes sense when you realise that this game was originally made for the Wii. Outside of that, on a port level, this game looks as good as it could possibly be. I will say though, there are a lot of cutscenes at the start of this game. There's also quite a bit of backtracking, which I know can be off-putting for some people. I do think though that this is all worth it since chapter 1 ends on a bit of a bombshell before the 7-year time skip. After that, the game opens up a bit more, having you explore more of this game's world now that you're an adult. There are also these skits that happen outside of the game story that the Tales of series is known for. Unlike Symphonia, the skits in Graces are fully voice acted, which really allows the characters to shine more outside of the story. These scenarios can range from a variety of different scenes. Some are serious, some are lighthearted, and some are just strange.
What's wrong with grilled chicken? Well, you know, I'm not into the greasy stuff.
You like grilled chicken, Sharia?
Of course. It's like they say, real women eat chicken.
What does she mean by this? Overall though, the skits really add some nice optional flair to the characters. So far I'm a bit mixed on the cast of characters in Tales of Graces, in particular with the main protagonist. Asbel's main motivation to want to protect people is admirable, but I found compared to previous Tales protagonists such as Lloyd, he just doesn't stick as much in the back of my head. I do like the supporting cast however, and they do have a decent bit of back and forth with Asbel. But what's really impressed me with Tales of Graces so far is how the characters' relationships grow throughout the story, since you know them as kids and you get to see it happen during the course of the narrative. On top of that, there's also a decent bit of mystery sprinkled in on top of all this to keep you more invested to want to find out what's going on. Moving on to the combat of Tales of Graces, and I've got to say this is my favourite part of the game overall. First and foremost, if you don't know, the Tales of games actually support couch co-op, allowing each player to control a party member. The combat is quite similar to beat 'em up style games, having you juggle your opponent and dealing stun damage. It takes a little getting used to, but the in-game tutorials are actually pretty good at familiarising you with how to play. This game's combat heavily favours defensive play, rewarding you for blocking and dodging moves. On the far left of the screen you have what's known as an E-lift gauge, and what you'll want to do is build this up by successfully dodge, blocking or attacking an opponent. Once filled, you'll no longer have cooldown on your moves alongside the ability to use your critical attack. Even compared to the previous game I played, Tales of Symphonia, I can safely say that Graces is a huge step up in terms of combat. Also, every character has their own unique moveset when it comes to battles. The biggest difference between all the characters is that some are more melee oriented, where some focus more on ranged attacks. There's also way more when it comes to the combat here, giving you the ability to switch between any party member on the fly. Next to this, you can also further customize the AI to focus on different fighting styles, be it healing, offensive or defensive. You might think watching this footage that the combat is just mindlessly button mashing, but the game actively goes out of its way to punish that playstyle. Bosses in particular actively gain their own meter when you mindlessly attack them when they're blocking, so you'll want to think carefully about when to attack at all times. In terms of the actual gameplay, Tales of Graces is much more linear compared to more conventional JRPGs. When it comes to the actual dungeon exploration, nothing is ever too confusing here. In particular, aspects like puzzle solving are very lightly done, and on top of that there's also a marker on screen at all times making sure that you'll never get lost, which makes this game perfect for newcomers. Tales of Graces also has an incredibly easy to understand crafting system. You'll be given this mixer item in chapter 2 and it will allow you to use any materials to buff up your equipment. Materials themselves are never too hard to come by, being very plentiful in the game's overworld. Enemies of course drop items, and the aforementioned quality of life tweaks allow you to buff whether or not you want them to drop more loot. But after all this overview, that begs the question, is Tales of Graces F Remastered worth your time? On a port level, this game is incredible. I played the PlayStation 5 version and can safely say that everything runs incredibly smooth here with no frame rate drops in sight. But taking a step back here and looking at the game on its own merit, I'm currently 30 hours into Tales of Graces F and feel like I want to finish the game so far. There has been some issues when it comes to pacing, mainly with the narrative, but the actual gameplay is top notch. I will say though, my overall recommendation does in fact come with a few footnotes. My first one being is just how eager you are to play this title, since Bandai Namco games go on sale fairly often. And it probably won't be long until Tales of Graces F Remastered goes on sale, since Tales of Symphonia is fairly cheap nowadays and is an extremely good bargain. There's also the added fact that there are so many JRPGs releasing this season. Just next month in fact, there are so many titles to count. If you're a huge fan of this genre, then there's a good chance that there are plenty of titles that you have your eyes out for, so maybe waiting out for a sale is a good call here. Personally, I'm very stoked on February 14th when Trolls Through Daybreak 2 finally gets localized. There's one more footnote here, that being if you're wanting to get into this series, then Tales of Symphonia is also a really good option. All of its port issues from back in the day have been addressed and the game now runs incredibly well. I'm also just going to come out and say it, Lloyd is a way more interesting protagonist when compared to Asbel. Tales of Symphonia is also cheaper when compared to the Graces F Remaster, although I will say that this re-release is fairly decent considering the price is less than the standard MSRP. Regardless of what decision you make, you really can't go wrong with either one of these titles. This is definitely one among the many great options for JRPG fans. I'm looking forward to finally finishing this title myself and seeing what all the fuss is about. I'm also glad because this whole remaster project really reminds me of how Capcom are trying to push for their old titles to be available on modern consoles. Here's hoping we won't have to wait long to find out what Tales of Remaster they're going to make next. Also, I know this is completely unrelated, but please Bandai Namco re-release Xenosaga on modern systems, it doesn't even exist in Europe. Anyway, that does it for this recommendation video on Tales of Graces F Remastered. Let me know what you think of this series, or if this remaster has interested you in the comment section. Once again, any feedback on this video would be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice rest of your day.